Hey guys, Jordan here, and in this video I'm going to be discussing how to choose the best shutter speed, aperture, and ISO settings for real estate photography. Alright, so if you're brand new or just coming across our channel, consider subscribing as we consistently put out real estate photography related content just like this consistently. So in regards to selecting the best shutter speed, aperture, and ISO settings for real estate photography, it really just depends on your goals and what equipment you're shooting with and the limitations of your camera, right? So recently, we've upgraded our fleet of cameras out in the field to the A7 IV, and recently I did a test between ISO 50 and ISO 100. Now typically we shoot a lot of ambient HDR style. We also shoot with lighting as well, but when I did the test, I did realize that ISO 50 performed quite a bit better than ISO 100, especially when you have to boost exposure quite a bit and go into the shadows, which you do have to do often in real estate photography. Now that's just one example, but not every shot needs to be shot at ISO 50. You need to figure out the limitations of your camera. And typically, we like to stick between that ISO 50 and with a max of ISO 400, right? So depending on what variables you want to manage when you're out there shooting, typically, we don't like to have to adjust all of our camera settings for every single shot that we're shooting. Now, if you're using off-camera flash or even on-camera flash, shutter speed is a variable that matters, because typically when you're getting at you have a shutter speed of 1/200 or faster, or higher, I guess it would be higher, you're gonna have some negative impacts on your image. Usually it shows like a negative bar because the shutter speed was so fast. So if that is a variable that you have when you're out there shooting, you're gonna have to manage your aperture or just keep an eye on it, right? Now, for us, we like to typically shoot in aperture priority mode, and usually our aperture is set to 7.1 or 8. Now, none of these settings are set in stone, right? So if we're outside and we want to get some mountains way in the distance, we might bump up our aperture to an f13 just to get more clarity on more of the image, right? Now, you don't necessarily need that in every room, right? There's not things way in the foreground. Depending on what you're shooting, if you're shooting a room, that's unnecessary. And the higher aperture setting you have, typically the longer your shutter speed. Obviously, you're not going to feel it outside if there's a whole lot of light. You will feel it when you're inside. In a low light scenario, you'll see that a higher aperture setting is going to lead to a longer shutter speed, assuming that ISO remains the same, right? So I gave my thoughts on a little bit of some of the variables in regards to shutter speed. Really is important if you're using flash. ISO is also important if you're using flash as well, because a higher ISO setting is going to give you more punch out of your lights, and also a lower aperture setting is going to give you more punch out of your lights. So if you're using a low powered flash, a lower aperture setting and a higher ISO setting might be the trick, but you got to make sure that your shutter speed stays slow enough, right, to not have any negative impacts on it. So anyways, I don't want this video to be too long. I just wanted to go over my thoughts on aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, and how to manage them when you're shooting real estate photography. If you got value out of this video, hit the like button, and that's it for this one. We'll see you guys on the next one.